Hi everyone, and welcome to week 4. Let's go ahead and get started. This lecture for this week will correspond to chapters 9 and 18 in the Evans and O'Leary textbook. Change is certainly inevitable in libraries, no matter what type of information environment that you might find yourself working in. This week, we're going to talk about some of the issues related to change in libraries, which really is more than just the mantra of accept it because it's going to happen. It is, it's inevitable, but we're going to try to delve in and look at some factors that affect change in libraries, including managing change and then also some changes in technologies and service models. You'll also be watching a webinar this week that deals with some aspect of change in libraries, and your assignment for this week is to use what you learned in the webinar and also through this week's readings and the lecture to complete a worksheet on managing change. So as you're starting to think about this topic, think about if you have experienced any kind of significant change in your working environment, either in libraries or otherwise. What changed? How did it affect you? How did you feel about it? And then how did it work out? Sometimes situating ourselves within the change can help us be a little bit more open and empathetic to those that are dealing with change. As managers, it's really important that we understand the dynamics related to change and how it will or will not affect library spaces, services, budgets, and staff. For example, let's say that you decide to eliminate or reduce the library's reference service model because statistics over the last few years have shown a significant decrease in the number of patrons using the service. The model changes from a hands-on sort of just-in-case approach to more of a student-centered DIY approach for reference services. What might this mean for the staff whose primary job it is to work at the reference desk? What may seem like a logical, data-driven decision to you as the manager could mean the loss of your staff's professional identity. In the text, Somosi and Duxbury are quoted by defining radical change as something that interrupts the status quo, happens quickly or abruptly, is fundamental and all-encompassing, and/or brings something that is dramatically different from what used to be. Incremental change, on the other hand, can sneak up very slowly, but can be equally disruptive because of the low stakes. There are, of course, many factors that influence change in libraries, and the better we can understand and anticipate these factors, the more we're able to lead positively and help staff navigate these changes. Taking a look at this list of external factors, which ones do you think result in radical change versus incremental change? It can definitely depend on the type of library environment, but technology and economic issues can definitely disrupt more quickly than, say, demographic changes such as patron trends. But then you also have things like changes to scholarly publishing models, which can be very incremental, but also seem to be happening more rapidly than ever before. Then you also have some internal factors. So these can include factors such as changing leadership, which disrupts the power structure. So for example, maybe a new department head is added or someone is promoted. Demographic shifts can also be a factor internally when it comes to changes in library staff related to retirements. Also, any new processes or policies that that are implemented can also result in rapid change. For example, new technologies. My library switched to a new integrated library system, ILS, in just 3 months last summer, or a year ago this past summer, and it resulted in tremendous change for the library staff. There were all new workflows, a new library catalog, lots of outreach and marketing for the new system. And it was a really difficult transition, partially because it happened so quickly, but we had an entire committee devoted to helping manage the change and keep lines of communication open, which really helped ease some of those internal factors of people feeling like they didn't necessarily get updated when things were changing in their actual work. Depending on the type of library that you're interested in, start thinking about examples that represent each level of these scales of transformation. Where might something like, for example, my example of transitioning to a new ILS fall? I think it actually could fall on all of these scales, but certainly it is a modular transformation, but there's also a lot of fine tuning that goes along with it as well. These scales or transformation levels here fit under what Evans and O'Leary discuss in the textbook related to organizational development. So as they mentioned, the scale of change is helpful for diagnosing both the individuals in the organization and the organization as well. Okay, now we're going to look at several change management theories and how they might be applied in a specific scenario. So there's going to be one scenario that we'll look at each of the different theories, but I want you to also think a little bit about your own library context and how you might apply some of these models or principles to your future or current workspace. The first theory that we're going to look at here is used to inform decision making, particularly in planning and implementing change management programs and organizations. The force field analysis theory is a powerful method of gaining comprehensive overview of different forces that are acting on a potential organizational change issue, and also for assessing their source and strength. This framework is used a lot in social science disciplines and was developed by a psychologist named Kurt Lewin in the 1950s. So here's a scenario that, again, this is going to sort of follow through the rest of the theories that we look at. The director of the Cabernet Community College Library felt that his catalogers were out of touch with the needs of the library patrons and hence were creating a catalog that did not meet patrons' needs. He decided that each cataloger should spend 5 hours a week in the reference department dealing with patron queries. This would also provide job enrichment for them. To his surprise, this idea met with a lot of resistance. So think about this scenario and the forces for and against the change, as well as the measures to both strengthen and increase the former and or weaken and reduce the latter. Remember that this theory, the force field analysis theory, looks at helping forces, which is moving closer to meeting a goal, and hindering forces, which is blocking movement towards that goal. If you want to pause the video and mull over this scenario, you're more than welcome to. Next up, we have Kurt Lewin again. This time we're looking at his three-phase change theory model, which is focusing on organizational change. Lewin says that successful organizational change may be planned, and this requires the system to be unfreezed. He suggests that the forces involving the status quo will create a minimum resistance and tension than the forces applying for change, and this strategy will be more effective for the change itself. So there's this process of unfreezing, managing the change or the transition, and then refreezing post-implementation. So this is a same case example as earlier. So take a look again and think about how could the change model of the unfreeze, transition, and refreeze be implemented to support change in this scenario. And next, we're going to move on to John Cotter's 8-step change model, which came from a mid-90s study called Leading Change. It includes ideas related to empowering staff, gaining small wins, and remaining cautiously optimistic while also remaining realistic about the advance of the change. One of the hallmarks of this particular model for change management is it requires a lot of patience and thought from the leader. So it's got these 8 steps here that cover a lot of areas. I like how it's the big opportunity in the middle there. So after you have a chance to think about Cotter's 8 steps, those are mentioned in the textbook as well. Think about how they may be able to be implemented to support the change in our scenario here. Finally, we have the writer, elephant, and path model, which comes from Dan and Chip Heath's book, Switch: How to Change Things When Change is Hard, from 2010. This book focuses on behavior change, and the key thesis is that most behavior change efforts fail because they're focused only at the writer level. So that first one on the left there. This is a particularly good model to use when dealing with resistance to change, something that you will all very likely deal with as managers, no matter what type of organization you end up in, and really whether you end up in a position or not, is this idea of resistance to change. This particular framework stresses that the processes of motivation and building trust are part of the kind of motivational effort to shape the path for the writer. And these are very crucial components when it comes to managing change. So again, and I guess before we get to this scenario, this is actually a marketing video for the Switch book, but it does delve into this particular theory a little bit more deeply. It's kind of interesting to watch. So if you'd like more information about that theory, this video is actually pretty helpful. And then we have finally the scenario once again. So think about how could implementing the theory of the writer, the elephant, and the path support the change in this particular scenario. All right, so we have made our way through some of these change management theories, and now we're going to move on to spend a bit of time talking about the rapid effects of technology on the information environment. So I mentioned this, I think, at the beginning of the semester, but this edition of our textbook is a little bit older. We're still waiting on the new edition to come out this fall. So things have changed somewhat since the publication of the book. There are some things in the technology chapter that are maybe a little outdated. For example, the authors talk a bit about the idea that libraries are sort of still wary of adopting technology. I do think that's a little outdated. At this point, it's really pretty much a given that libraries are all in with technology. There's not much of a choice there. So let's look at what that means in terms of changes in technology, particularly thinking about some of those change management theories that we just looked at. As Evans and O'Leary note in the textbook chapter, and this is a quote from them, being an effective steward of funds and balancing all of your users' needs and wants against available resources will be one of your ongoing challenges. It's definitely true that technology permeates basically every aspect of the library's work, from book lending to book purchasing to the types of information that's collected and made available to patrons. We're getting to the point where many library staff have basically always worked with technology. In other words, the profession of librarianship is skewing, I'd say, more towards professionals that have always used online catalogs versus card catalogs, or even, a decade ago, it was the opposite. However, there are still some librarians that are hesitant to adopt new technologies in the workplace. This could be because it could disrupt their day-to-day. Remember, for example, that reference service model that we talked about earlier. Or maybe it's just because they don't want to have to learn a new technology or a new tool. Regardless, while libraries can somewhat manage the rate at which they adopt new tech, it's really not an option to move forward without any kind of digital solution. So let's look at a few of the different aspects of technologies in libraries and some of the considerations for managers. So first up, we're going to look at infrastructure, and there are several questions to consider. They're not quite in the same order, but this is like those journalistic 5 W's, the who, where, what, when, and why. First of all, we've got the question of IT. So where is IT managed? And who is managing it? Are they internal? Do they work for the bigger organization? For example, in academic libraries, IT can be run in-house in the library or managed by the campus. It can be tricky when IT is not managed in the library because there are special needs in terms of licensing and networks, and I think that the considerations can sometimes not, and the nuances of library technology will always be seen by a bigger organization, IT. Next up, we've got what information is being collected in terms of statistics and other data. Where is it being collected? And then who is assessing and analyzing the information and to what end? So the answers to these questions can impact the manager's advocacy work, budget decisions, and also assess what's going on in terms of services and policies, what's going well, what's not working. Data can help with all of that, and technology can help with that data collection. The last two questions here deal with staff training and updates or changes to technology. If the infrastructure for acquisitions, for example, is changed rapidly, then who's going to be training the staff? What kind of change management process will be put into place? Would one of those theories work better than others? Additionally, how often should tech get updated? That's definitely going to affect budget decisions, but also patron satisfaction. Libraries often have to weigh, for example, the decision of switching to a new database interface carefully. This isn't a decision they make, it's up to the vendor, but libraries can decide when they flip the switch for that to happen. Patrons can definitely panic if their favorite resources search box changes location overnight. It may seem like a simple thing, but even this small tech change can cause an avalanche of other issues with satisfaction and complaints and managing kind of that side of things. Next up, let's look at patron interactions. So these are factors that affect service models and indicate areas of outreach to the library community. Again, no matter the type of library. So one of the things to look at is how patrons are getting books and other materials. So are students in a K-12 classroom getting access and or exposure to multimodal resources like videos or recordings that may increase learning opportunities? Is the library's website mobile friendly? Has the library created apps? Do they engage with their patrons online? Do they have technology in the library that's available for use? These are all factors. And this kind of goes back a little bit too to what I mentioned on the last slide about budget decisions and how often the technology is updated. So if your patrons are used to accessing specific software on library computers, how often do you need to update that, and where is that money coming from? Accessibility is also an extremely important issue, and new guidelines are being developed all the time. And this can really impact the library websites as well as how patrons can access materials through databases or the library catalog or other resources. It also has implications for technology in the library's physical space. So are there screen readers available? Are there text recordings or voice-to-text recordings available for patrons? Finally, we have the issue of patron privacy and security, and this is something that I'm really interested in, especially as a manager. I think that there's a lot of really interesting ways that we can engage our community. So you may have heard of Allison Macrina, who's the founder and executive director of something called the Library Freedom Project. And there's a lot of great resources available on that site and just through Allison's Twitter and blog that are available for helping patrons learn about privacy and protecting their digital footprint. This is such an important issue for libraries, as I said, and I think managers and library leaders can play a really important role in educating our staff and also our communities about issues surrounding digital privacy. And this could be related to the wide-ranging impact of data analytics and AI. A lot of our library technology is collecting patron data, and so where does that go, and what do we do with it? So there's a lot of issues there that I think we're just really starting to delve into, and we could probably have a whole nother course on that particular topic. Before we finish up, I just want to take a quick moment to comment on fostering innovation in your library. This is also something that I am very passionate about as a manager. In my experience, the most interesting solutions, tech-based or otherwise, come from brainstorming and prototyping solutions to tricky problems. It doesn't have to be some sort of major high-tech solution either. Sometimes the most innovative ideas come from small libraries with tiny staffs and minimal budgets. The point is trying something new and encouraging your staff to try something new. Libraries play a really important role as sort of an incubator of generating new ideas and contributing to the common good, both for our patrons, but definitely also for our staff as well. And that's really, I think, where the manager role comes in. One of the best things you can do is to empower your staff to try new things and to think about uh, different ways of doing things, think outside of the box. And almost more importantly, is making sure that they know it's okay to fail. So not all ideas will stick, but you never know unless you try. Kind of a cliche, but it's true. Libraries are exciting places to work, partly because you can't really break anything. And I feel that a way about teaching too. I want you all to learn in the way that best suits you. So I'm always open to your suggestions for how to make things flow a little bit better or work out best for you. I really think that change is easiest when it's presented as growth and positive forward momentum. And it's crucial for the manager to remember this and then communicate that regularly with their staff. So those are my last little words of wisdom for the week. And that'll do it for the lecture. I hope you have a fantastic week.